Hello and welcome to the second module of our MOOC about biodiversity and global change. This module consists of two lessons. The first is about the evolution of biodiversity. In the second, you will learn how biologists are making an inventory about all the species that evolved on Earth. In this first video, I want to talk about biological evolution and how it works. Because if you want to understand how the biodiversity on this planet came about, and you want to understand the patterns that we can observe in biodiversity, then you need to understand evolution. So, let's talk about the theory of evolution. Because the theory of evolution, that's an explanation of how evolution works. That's an important distinction to make. Evolution is the process that's happening out there. Our explanations of how evolution works, that's the theory of evolution. That's not the same thing. Evolution is a process that creates patterns we observe in nature. For example, these homologous front limbs of various tetrapod species are a pattern we can observe. They are all similar because all these species evolved from a common ancestor which had a similar forelimb with a full set of bones. The limbs also show differences because each evolved to best adapt to the way in which it is being used, and they're all being used for different purposes. Here's another pattern that resulted from the process of evolution. This shows a short DNA sequence from 15 different insect species. As you can see, in several species the short piece of DNA is identical. Other sequences are slightly different but still very similar. Just like the forelimbs in the previous image, the DNA sequences shown here all derive from the DNA sequences of one ancestral species from which all the species shown here have evolved. But how does evolution work? Let's use a simple example of a unicellular species. So each individual is represented here by one of the pink dots in this graphic. The species is haploid, meaning each organism has only one set of genes. The whole genome is on one circular molecule, represented here by the black circle. In this example, we're looking at a population that consists of only 10 individuals. So this is our first generation. Individuals in this species reproduce by splitting into two. As is often the case, population size stays the same, so not every individual was able to split. Some died before they were able to reproduce, and so they have no descendants in the next generation. Others were able to survive and split, and so they have two descendants each in the second generation. Every change in a species starts with a single change of the DNA sequence in one little cell. This change in the DNA sequence is called a mutation. The mutation could have no effect on its carrier, or it could cause its carrier to be different from the other organisms in the species. In this simple example, all members of the species were pink in the first generation. Then a mutation occurred in the gene for body color, which causes its carrier to be blue. Different versions of a gene are called alleles. So now, in the second generation pictured here, this population has two different alleles for body color. One individual is blue. The blue organism was able to split, and so, in the third generation, two individuals are blue. In order for mutation to get passed on to the next generation, it must be heritable. This means the mutation must have happened on a piece of DNA that actually can get passed on to the next generation. In this case, where the organism split to reproduce, this is not an issue because all the DNA gets copied and passed on to both descendants. In the fourth generation, the blue allele could be found in 4 organisms, then in 6 individuals in generation 5. As you can see, the blue allele is spreading across the population over the course of several generations. So the population changed from having only pink individuals to having a mixture of pink and blue. The population has changed, and that's evolution. Now the population could stay this way, with a mixture of pink and blue organisms, with varying frequencies of pink and blue for many generations and a very long time. Or it could happen that at some point in time, all the individuals of that population are blue, as shown in the 6th generation in this graphic. So the population has evolved from having only pink individuals to having only blue organisms. That makes the evolution even more obvious. A pink population became a blue population. The frequency of the blue allele went from 0 to 0.1, then 0.2, 0.4, and 0.6 to a frequency of 1. At the same time, the frequency of the pink allele went from 1 to 0. So the frequencies of both alleles changed over the course of generations. And that's evolution. Okay, so this was an illustration of the simple case of a unicellular haploid species. Both traits apply to all prokaryotes. Now, if you know a little bit about biology, you know that most eukaryotes are diploid, meaning they have 2 copies of each gene, except for the eggs and sperm, which are haploid. Now, this makes the model a little more complex, too complex to show it here, but the result is the same. A heritable mutation occurs, creating a new allele, and this allele can spread over the population over the course of time. The allele's frequency changes, and that's evolution. So the modern definition of evolution is a change in the frequencies of alleles in a population over the course of generations. But why do these changes in allele frequencies occur? There are different reasons that can cause this. An allele can increase in frequency in the population over time because it gives its carrier an advantage over individuals with different alleles, so that the individuals who have this allele have on average more offspring than the others. Conversely, if the allele gives its carrier a disadvantage, it can decrease in the population. Now, any change of frequency of an allele that is due to an evolutionary advantage or disadvantage that it gives the organism that has the allele is called natural selection. But even alleles that are neutral, meaning they do not give its carrier an advantage or disadvantage, can change in frequency in the population, simply due to chance alone. In other words, an allele could get lucky or unlucky. Biologists call this genetic drift. Another reason for allele frequencies to change is the emigration or immigration to and from other populations. This is what we call gene flow. If an allele or trait has an advantage and increases in frequency because it is popular with the other gender, for example, beautiful plumage of male birds that is popular with the females, that's called sexual selection instead of natural selection. And if the frequencies of alleles or traits change in a population because humans only allow those individuals to breed that have a certain allele or trait, then we call this artificial selection. Dogs evolved from ancient wolves, driven by artificial selection. Artificial selection also drove the evolution of wild cabbage into many of the cultivated kinds of cabbages. All the cabbages you see in this photo and the wild cabbage are considered to be the same species, Brassica oleracea. Over time, an allele that has managed to spread over one population of a species could eventually spread over the entire species. So in our example, our species, I'll call it species 1, could evolve from being pink to being blue if the blue allele spreads over all the members of the species. It would still be the same species though, species 1. Alternatively, it could be that the members of species 1 lived in 2 separate places and the 2 groups aren't in contact anymore. For example, a large population on the main continent and a small population on an island. So then the blue allele spreads to all individuals on the mainland, but not those on the island. Over time, other changes could evolve in one of the 2 populations, so that even if the blue individuals from the mainland met the pink individuals on the island, they wouldn't mate with each other. Or they would mate, but they wouldn't be able to produce fertile offspring. Then biologists would consider them different species. So species 1 would have evolved into species 2 and species 3. That's a process that we call speciation. Species 2 or species 3 can undergo speciation again so that they become 3 species. And these can split again, and so forth. So we end up with lots and lots of species that are all connected by a common evolutionary history. And if species 1 happens to be the ancestor of all living beings alive today, then that evolutionary history is the tree of life. In the third video of this module, I'm going to explain how to read such a tree. For more details and explanations about the process of evolution, please have a look at the supplementary reading. If after watching this video and reading the supplementary material, you still have questions about evolution, please let us know on the discussion forum. Thank you for watching this video. See you soon!